Welcome to another Countryside Adventures video. In this video, I wanted to share with you a few tips and tricks and just the overall process that Colin and I have learned over the years to refletch arrows. Now, if you'll hang out to the end of this video, I'm going to give you a tip on installing fletchings on your own arrows, and it will help the longevity of your arrows and your fletchings, and it will make you much more consistent in the field, especially when hunting. We have actually been using this arrow for a little while now for target practice. And we've kind of gone through, we've checked it for straightness, we've checked the weights, everything's still in spec. It's just the fletchings have taken a pretty good beating and they're in bad shape. So I've actually started removing the first one, and one of them was actually cut, so it just tore off. So what we're really wanting to do here is start with the best clean slate possible for remounting and refletching this arrow. And I'm going to walk through that process kind of from beginning to end, and this will give you a pretty good idea of either refletching an arrow or actually just going ahead and fletching your own arrows. So to get us started on this process, I want to walk through a few tools that you'll need to complete the job, and a couple of them may be optional, but a couple of them are definitely going to be required. So let's go ahead and walk through the tools real quick. So the first thing that you're going to need is a fletching jig, and we actually like the Bitzenburger fletching jig, and this one is from John Dudley over at Knock On Archery, and it is actually to John Dudley specs. So that has worked out really well for us between hunting and shooting tack. We really like the specifications that comes with the Knock On Bitzenburger. So that's what we've been using for the last year and a half or so. And there is a lot of different fletching tools out there that are not as expensive as the Bitzenburger. So, if you're on a budget, you can start out with something a little bit cheaper, but this is just what we have here to go ahead and fletch up our arrows. The next thing is we're going to need something to bond the fletchings. And we really like the AAE Max Bond adhesive, so we're going to use that. And depending on your application, your fletchings may or may not need a primer, but we really like the AAE Maxwell primer pen, so we'll be using that. And Colin and I, over the years, we've really come to like putting a small drop of the Max Bond AAE glue on our nocks if we're not going to be switching over to any sort of lighted nock or anything like that for hunting application. And the reason for that is if you go ahead and clock your arrow to a certain position that you lock on your bow, say for a particular rest, or maybe if you're going to just refletch for one fletching, something like that, once the nock is in and you're going to put it in your fletching jig, it will not move at that point, and so everything always goes back to the same position. Now, the caveat to that is if you hit one of those nocks, sometimes they'll just get knocked loose, they'll come off, whatever it is. If it's glued in and it gets hit, 9 times out of 10, it's going to break. It's just a give and take to whatever you're doing. We really prefer to go ahead and glue them in. That way it's clocked in a good position. So with that, you'll probably need a pair of pliers to go ahead and get the knock out and get it back in. That way you don't damage it. And next up is the Steel Bond Fletch Glue Remover. And at the top it says shake well, so you can get the chemicals mixed in really well with this. But you do not have to have this. This is an option, but we have really come to like this stuff. It doesn't damage the arrow. It doesn't degrade anything about it. It really doesn't even break down the plastic, say if it gets on like a knock or something accidentally. But this stuff is really great for breaking down any excess glue, any fletching material that's stuck onto the arrow. And it just makes it that much easier so that you're not sitting there beating up a carbon arrow or an aluminum arrow trying to get the fletching off of it. And the next tool is we like to keep an extra utility knife around. And we actually keep a specific utility knife just for this job. And the reason why I say that is the utility blade in this utility knife is really dull. What you don't want is a very sharp utility knife that's going to be gouging into a carbon arrow or really beating up and gouging into an aluminum arrow, even if it's just an aluminum jacket, anything like that. The main purpose of this is just to go ahead and cut through that fletching, get it off, and go ahead and scrape any excess glue off. And that way you can go ahead and wipe it up and clean it up. So it does not have to be sharp. Now, that doesn't mean that it has to be extremely blunt, but you just don't want anything sharp enough so that you're digging into your good arrows or any aluminum, any carbon, anything like that. So just a cheap utility knife with a dull blade, or you could also use anything just like an old folding knife or maybe an extra kitchen knife that you have laying around. It just doesn't need to be extremely sharp, and you kind of want to keep it specifically for this purpose. That way you don't get anything confused or any cross-contamination from cleaning chemicals or fletching glues, anything like that. So we just keep an extra old utility knife around for this. And last but not least, you're going to need the fletching of your choice. So for this job, we're going to be using the AAE hybrid fletching. So to begin this process, the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and pull the knock out of this arrow. And I know that this wasn't glued in because I had actually put a small mark on one of the fletchings to let me know that it had not been glued in. And the way that I like to do these is, and again, I would not glue this in if it was a hunting specific arrow, because there may be an instance where I want to switch over to a lighted nock or something different. But for just a field practice arrow, what I've done is I put just a small drop of glue on the end of that nock. And then as I insert it, I'm just going to give it a little bit of a rotation and make sure that it bottoms all the way out. And then I'm going to wipe around that seam. And now while I'm cleaning up all my fletching surface, my nock will be drying. So I'm just going to use my utility knife for a little bit of assist. And I'm just going to prop up that arrow. And I'm going to go ahead and give this a shake. And we're going to use our Steel Bond Fletch Glue Remover. And you can just paint this stuff right on and let it start to soak in. And it'll start dissolving that glue really fast. While that's soaking into that side, I'm going to go ahead and cut away these two fletchings. And you can see that those are starting to strip away really easy. A lot of times when I do this, I'll actually do it over a trash can. But for this, just so that you could see it, just went ahead and laid out an old paper towel, something that I could just kind of wipe everything up and throw it away pretty easy. You can kind of hear that glue on there. I don't know if you can hear that or not, but it's starting to break down and come off as I cut away. So at this point, I have all the big pieces off of it, but you can see some of the discoloration there. I hope you can see that in the lens. And it's just pieces of the glue and the fletching on there. So that's where this remover really comes in. I can paint this on and give it just a couple of minutes to soak in, and all that stuff will strip off very easily. And that'll give us a clean slate to go back together with this. So as you can see, that stuff is starting to come off there pretty quick. You can see all that glue and that fletching material that's come off of there. And at this point, go ahead and wipe it down. So you can see all that glue's off of there now. We pretty much got a clean slate. You can see all the glue that we've scraped off with our dull utility knife. And now that we have all that off, I'm just going to do kind of I'm going to call it a rough cleaning with a paper towel. And then I'm going to go back with an AAE Max Clean wipe. I'm going to do a really good clean on this. I want to make sure that shaft has a clean surface for everything to bond to. I'm going to let that dry for just a second. And then at that point, I can go ahead and get my nock down the jig. I've got my fletchings laid out. What we did on our fletching tool, just to share with you really quick, is we actually used a wrap that had the proper distance for the AAE hybrid vanes. And then we just mimicked that distance off of the wrap and put a small Sharpie mark here on our fletching jig. So that way we know where to line up the back side of our fletching with that mark. And so we know the distance from the end of the nock where that fletching should be mounted. So that's just a quick tip that we kind of figured out over time. So at that point, our fletching and our mark are lined up. Some of the instructions from AAE advise that you do not need the Maxwell primer to go on to the hybrid fletchings. But for this, since we've kind of cleaned this surface, we have chemical contamination and stuff like that, I really prefer to go ahead and just make a quick wipe with a primer pen down the fletching. And then whenever I go ahead and put my glue on, I know that at least on this side, I'm starting fresh and I can kind of go from there with it. So I like to hold it in this hand and I can just take my pen and kind of support just like that. And I'm just going to make a very quick wipe down it. That's all that I'm going to do on that. And this process has worked out really well for us. We've probably been using this same process for, it's been over a year and a half, maybe 2 years now, something like that. And it's definitely evolved over time. And like I said, if any of you other archers out there, or maybe archery shops, anyone with home archery shops, whatever it may be, if you've kind of got a different method or a different technique or different ideas, so please do us a favor and leave a comment down below. And we'd love to check out maybe what you have going on with your archery setup. And honestly, we'd like to take some of your ideas and see if it helps us out in our shop. So I like to give these about 30 seconds to get a good bond. And for the Bitzenburger, you rotate counterclockwise. So we're going to go around. And I'm going to rotate these. So we'll do a black, a pink, and a black. So again, we're lined up on our mark into the fletching. We're going to grab our primer pen, just a quick wipe. And you might be able to see in the lens, you can see that the primer pen is doing its job because it has the color of that fletching on the tip of it. And after about my 30 seconds from getting my fletching on there and just letting it set up in the jig, normally what I'll try to do is just go ahead and leave it in that position and let it start to bond really well. It's not going to move, but I just want to make sure that the glue is starting to set up really well before I start moving the jig around too much. And again, we're going to rotate counterclockwise. The black makes it really easy to see. You may be able to see that line of glue on there. Just kind of the amount and the consistency that we use for our fletchings. So about another 30 seconds. And our fourth fletching. And this is a process that's really easy to do in a home archery shop. And honestly, it's going to take you a little bit of time to kind of, figure out your style and what makes a comfortable setup for you. But this is really a fast process. Once you kind of get a rhythm down to it, it doesn't take long. And honestly, it's really enjoyable to know that you kind of built your own stuff and it's to your specs and something that you enjoy using. So last fletching, number 4. So we're going to put that on there and we're going to give this one at least another 30 seconds. Once I have all of my fletchings glued onto the arrow, and you can kind of see the helical, what I like to do is take the AAE Max Clean Wipe and go between each fletching and clean out any excess glue. You can probably see that in the lens. I want to clean out all of that glue, or at least as much as possible. It's definitely not going to be perfect, but we can get as much of that out of there as we can. And that glue is going to set up really fast. So while it's still not completely set up, we can just kind of go over it. Now that we've cleaned up all the glue between the fletchings on our arrow and we've pretty much got everything seated into place and the glue is starting to dry, it's tacked up really well. That quick tip that I promised you at the beginning of this video. Now, over the last few years, as Colin and I have evolved with setting up our own bows and building our own arrows, and just kind of making sure that everything is consistent as possible. After all, archery is all about consistency. One of the things that we have learned to do, especially with our hunting arrows, but we've even carried it over into our target arrows because we try to be as consistent as possible from our hunting arrows to our target arrows. Is what we like to do is we're going to use our AAE Max Bond glue. And what I like to do is I'm going to start at the back, and I'm just going to put a small amount. And I'm actually going to use the tip of the glue bottle, the tip of that glue nozzle, I guess you could call it, to kind of wipe it down into the end of those fletchings. And then I'm going to flip it over. And a lot of times when I'm doing this, what I'll do is I'll kind of rest the arrow against my chest, and I can look down and I can have a good line of sight to it. But at that point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same thing on the front. And it's just a very small drop. That one right there is actually the perfect amount. That one is a little bit excess. In fact, before it dries, I'll wipe that off just a little bit. And so now you can see that there is a tiny spot of glue at the front and the back of each fletching. And so what that will do is it'll stop the initial peel or the initial tear of that fletching from coming off of that arrow. And what we've discovered in hunting applications is more often than not, especially if you're shooting a heavier poundage. Now, we don't shoot anything excessively heavy, but we've discovered as you shoot, and if that arrow happens to travel completely through an animal, those fletchings do not tear off, they don't rip off, they don't end up on the ground, they don't end up on anybody's private hunting property or public grounds, anything like that. Those fletchings are absolutely bonded on there. Wherever you go with that arrow, they're coming out with you. If you happen to clip one out target practicing, if it's even just a target arrow, those things are pretty much bulletproof at that point. The fletching will actually fail much further up the entirety of the fletching rather than peeling off at the mounting point. So as you can see, this is a fairly simple process. We now have a completed arrow, or in our case, we have a repaired arrow. So if you've enjoyed the video, or if this has helped you out in any way, you know the deal. Please do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up. It really helps the algorithm. And as always, we'll see you outdoors.